sags, you can notice it.
For me, sometimes I think the album, it drags a little later on, but then it's very much so. It's like, it is like a typical long drawn out night out, and I think it's very good at. I think it's very good at reflecting its subject matter, and I think it's got a lot of atmosphere. And I guess there are tracks I'm not as keen on, but there's nothing I dislike on there.
There's a couple of standout tracks like A Better Look on the Dance Floor and Mardy Bum, but I think the rest just kind of are very samey. So I'd say anything outside those singles, and like I said, tracks like Mardy Bum, I'd say they're all weaker than the singles because they're all very much of a muchness.
But generally speaking, like I said, it's a really, really strong debut, with more peaks than troughs by a long way, definitely.
Following their inclusion on the prestigious NME Tour during January and February, the first of many awards befell them, including the magazine's own accolades for Best New Band, and Best Track.
Oh, the NME absolutely loved the Arctic Monkeys when they first came around. It was like someone had reinvented the wheel. It was ridiculous. It was like, there were, I think when the single went to #1, the headline on the front page was, "What Britain's Been Waiting For." It's like, well, come on, this is a band. But NME, the NME absolutely went mad for this band. They just couldn't get enough of them. They're still doing it today. They're still talking about how this band are the best band in Britain and all these, and I think without NME, Arctic Monkeys probably wouldn't be where they are today.
Certainly the early Arctic Monkeys fans bombarded the NME with emails saying, look, you've got to watch out for this band. And so it was unavoidable for them that they had to kind of sit up and listen. And their reaction was slightly, I guess probably they were responsible for the hype in that they were very much making huge statements about the Arctic Monkeys and calling them the most important band this year and what have you, very early on. So yeah, it was, in some ways it was typical NME championing another band, as they did with the Strokes, and they've always done, really.
We were covering them well before their first single was out. We covered them well up to the Reading performance at 2005, because prior to that we'd been talking about them, and when Reading came around, this was still 2 months before their first single proper came out, when Reading came around, everyone knew about them and wanted to see them, and so we're absolutely that was eagerly awaited performance of that weekend, and it didn't disappoint. And then after that there was really no stopping them. The week that they had their first single out, NME had them on the cover, and I think that will go down as one of the big covers, certainly of that year, and probably years surrounding it as well, because it was a moment where I think again NME was very, very closely related to a significant development in British pop culture, as it has been pretty much for the last 50 odd years.
They refused to perform at the Brit Awards and instead filmed their acceptance speech for the Best British Breakthrough Act with Keith Murray from American band We Are Scientists posing as their frontman.
Arctic Monkeys are not your typical rock stars. They are quiet. They are not big spending, Porsche driving, bleach blonde haired, bimbo flaunting rock stars in any way. They are just normal lads who don't really like talking about themselves, especially in the early days. They hated talking about themselves and their songs and what they were all about.
I last spoke to Alex just ahead of the second album coming out, and this was the same lad who I spoke to before they were signed and after they were signed, and the day before they went to their first #1, and they're very, very unaffected lads. I think to go what they've gone through, to go from playing to 30 people in a pub to playing to 100,000 plus at Glastonbury, they're the most unaffected individuals I've ever met.
They came into Kerrang Radio Studios in their sort of early days and refused to play during an acoustic session, refused to play I Bet You Look Good on the Dance Floor. They just said, we don't want to play it. And that was the whole reason they'd come in for. They do not play the game at all. They play it in their own way, but they certainly don't play in the media way, as a lot of rock stars do.
Despite being the most in-demand band in the country, Turner & Co. remained distant from the media circus, refusing the majority of interviews and TV appearances. Their approach to marketing the album was unusual too, for rather than milk their success in the time-honored way of lifting a string of singles from the album, the Arctic Monkeys opted to issue a 5-track EP, comprised mainly of new material and bearing the unbroadcastable title, Who the Fuck Are the Arctic Monkeys? The band were matching the prolific work rate of bands like the Smiths and Oasis.
in current day modern rock, if you like, the tendency is to release an album and then flog it to death for 2 years, which is standard practice pretty much, but it's also extremely boring, particularly for the band involved. And whilst most bands will go along with it because it's financially beneficial and that's what they're led into by people who work for them, Arctic Monkeys didn't want any of that. They wanted to keep a kind of head of steam, keep their creativity up, and people would have criticised them for trying to capitalise on their popularity by releasing an extra EP. That just seems ridiculous because they're giving their fans like more tracks, new material, very strong material as well.
As an EP, Who the Fuck Are the Arctic Monkeys is kind of a follow-on from the debut album, just because there's a reworking of an album track on there. There is actually a complete album track on that as well. It's almost like if there were 5 secret tracks on the end of the album, these would be the 5 secret tracks. It kind of fits like that. It's a little bit of a step on, but not so far that it's a completely different project. Similar themes run through it. As I say, reworkings of an old demo track as well.
In terms of the content, I think it was the stuff that wouldn't quite fit on the first album, but also what it was. They were itching to release something because they'd the second album was pretty much all but written, and it was that segue. It was just them, I think, stretching their legs a little bit after all the kind of the furore that surrounded that first album, and it was. I think it was a good little indication as to what was coming.
It was then the band suffered their first setback when bass player Andy Nicholson announced he would not be joining his colleagues on an American tour because of fatigue. Shortly after, he left the band for good. Although the band continued releasing new material, this time with the Leave Before the Lights Come On single, Nicholson's exit came completely out of the blue and seemed more than a little mysterious.
It was very unexpected. Certainly in a sort of public way. I mean, no one really expected a member of a band who were currently pretty much on top of the world, to just sort of say, I don't really fancy doing this anymore. It was quite a shock in that respect, and I'm sure a lot of people thought he was having some sort of mental breakdown as a result, because why would any sane person do that? But the touring life is not for everyone. Definitely not for everyone. And I think Andy Nicholson was probably felt that he was one of those people.
Well, I mean, I don't know him personally, but they say that he left because of fatigue, and the fame of the band suddenly shot up so much that apparently it was just a bit too much, which is understandable. But there's no hard feelings with the boys in the band. I've seen them a couple of times, and they're still mates, and we saw them at festivals together, and I think he's actually working on a new project, so it's all good. Yeah, I just think it was a bit too much.
No, I don't think it was bitter. I mean, they're still mates, and they still hang around, and when they did their Carling weekend, their Leeds festival, certainly at Leeds, he was still knocking around with Matt, the drummer, and the rest of the band, and they're all still very pally. I think for Andy, I think it was probably more of, it was the lifestyle change. I think if you put yourself in their shoes of suddenly going from, as I say, from playing pubs to stadiums, and to being sort of, I don't know, fairly innocuous character who plays bass in a little local band, to suddenly being thrust into every tabloid. Not everybody's going to want that, and not everybody can deal with that. And I think, I don't know Andy so well, but he's a nice lad, and he's I think maybe he just maybe didn't want that. There was certainly never a falling out. I think it was just, things change, and they, their lives changed so dramatically, and it's not everybody's cup of tea.
With the band eventually appointing Nick O'Malley as Nicholson's permanent replacement, the Arctic Monkeys continue to pick up accolades at every turn. Most notably, the world-famous Mercury Music Prize, which they are awarded above Muse, Tom York, and their personal favorites and fellow Sheffielder, Richard Hawley, amongst others. The band donated the money to charity.
The winner of the 2006 Nationwide Mercury Prize is Arctic Monkeys! For their album, Whatever People Say I Am, That's What I Am Not! And if the Arctic Monkeys could please come up here to collect your award. Up here, gentlemen, please. Don't forget, there's a check.
Oh, yeah, I'll take that.
All right.
Somebody call 999, Richard Hawley's been robbed.
Oh yeah, thanks everyone. And who else agrees that Jules don't look like he was born in 1958, does he?
Oh, everybody does.
Jules don't look like he was born. Anyway, cheers, I've got nothing else to say that's funny as that.
I mean, I've got, I don't know if it's as funny as that, but I mean, it's definitely... No, thanks ever so much, like everyone that's helped us and that, and clickety click.
That's all you can hear, innit? It's trying to get digital.
And no, because normally, I don't go to a band that's, I suppose, sold as many records as we have. Like, but to put it bluntly, but but it's still, we're very, very pleased with it because it's just like good tunes really. That's like what I think we try to do. Oh, steady on. And and no like tricks really, because there's too many people trying to do too many tricks. So like, thank you ever so much anyway. Push on.
In terms of pressure, I think Arctic Monkeys handle pressure incredibly well. They are so laid back, and I think they're so confident in their own abilities. Without being arrogant, they know that they can write good songs. They know that they've got the backing from the fans, the backing from a good record label. I think in terms of pressure, they were just, if you don't like the second album, you don't like it.
Lawrence Bell at Domino Records is known for being, quite an artist-friendly kind of person, and he's not so much a kind of money counter, which is always the way for record labels that don't actually make that much money, certainly previous to the Arctic Monkeys and bands like Franz Ferdinand. But I think that's also why the Arctic Monkeys wanted to sign to Domino, because they knew that they wouldn't have that pressure. They knew that they wouldn't have people knocking on their door every 5 minutes saying, "Where's the album? We need an album because we need to sell some units." And the artist freedom, I think, that's involved with being on Domino is something that they were attracted to. And again, it shows that they were canny to pursue it, because it meant that there wouldn't be so much pressure on them to deliver, and they took that in precedence to a hell of a lot of money, that I'm sure they were getting offered initially. So that, like I said, is something that would have helped their longevity and have helped their sanity in the long run as well.
A full year after they first hit #1 with I Bet You Look Good on the Dance Floor, the band began to record a new album. As with any such act who had enjoyed so much success so quickly, the pressure was on the Arctic Monkeys to prove themselves, but they quietly went about the business of creating a more aggressive and muscular sound with celebrated producer James Ford. The first fruit of this collaboration emerged during April of 2007 in the shape of the driving comeback single, Brainstorm.
Yeah, I would have thought, there's probably the same sort of, hype for the second album. Maybe not as much, but I think that there was a lot more pressure on the boys. Not that they really felt it, I don't think, but there was a lot more pressure on them to, to come up with a killer second album, which they did, But the hype was there, yeah, of course. I mean, it was like any big band releasing an amazing debut, you're always going to hype up the second one. And, luckily for them and luckily for everyone, it was a corker.
I think Brainstorm was an incredible comeback single. I mean, how could it be a comeback? They weren't away for very long, but it was the big, have they still got it? Were they just a one-hit wonder? I think they came back and proved that they can do what they do well and they can do what they do better.
You just have to listen to the first 5 seconds of Brainstorm to to know that this is a band that have really moved up a couple of gears. Matt Helder's drumming is certainly something that comes across really strongly in that song, and as a drummer obviously I'm going to be listening for that anyway, but I mean it's just powers that song, and it doesn't have that kind of like, you know, like a catchy chorus perhaps that I Bet You Look on the Dance Floor had or whatever, but you can tell it's a band that are really doing something different, moving on, not content to be, again, not content to rest on their laurels.
Brainstorm, yeah, I think it's a great track. It's definitely the best first single to come out of the album, I think. You know, amazing drums. It was obviously, you know, they were being a lot heavier. You know, they already said that they were listening to a lot more stuff on the road and on the tour, you know, Queens of the Stone Age and stuff like that, and you can hear it. You know, amazing drums. Yeah, and amazing lyrics. It's what you expect from the Arctic Monkeys, but you could see that they'd taken a notch up. You know, it took it to the next level.
The guitars were a bit crunchier. It was an edgier track, I suppose slightly less accessible than some of the earlier stuff. So I think they were challenging their fans a little bit, but I think they proved that this was a very talented band.
1 week later, the eagerly awaited second album, Favorite Worst Nightmare, went straight to the top of the charts, selling more than the rest of the top 20 combined in its first week on sale. It was also a great critical success. The Arctic Monkeys' great musical development was there for all to hear.
I was lucky to get enough to get an interview with Alex the week before the second album came out, and we talked about pressure, and he says really they didn't feel it so much. That he said there was the pressure that they feel is what they put on themselves to try and maintain, I guess, the quality or just to keep up with everything that's going on around them.
The hype around the second album was interesting because the hype around the first album and the first single had been so rabid and so internet-led that I think by the time they released the second album it was almost expected that it was going to be big.
Flicking through a little book of sex tips. Remember when the bars are all electric, and now when she tells she's gonna get it, I'm guessing that Geralda just forgets it.
The critical response has been quite funny in a certain sense because there was one write-up in The Independent, I remember, a live write-up that kind of remarked in a kind of begrudging way almost that the most disappointing thing about the Arctic Monkeys is their complete failure to be terrible, which I think is a great way to kind of sum up, you know, the expectancy and the hype around it.
Favorite Worst Nightmare did live up to the expectation of the fans. You know, it's been again massively well received, successful. You've still got tracks on there that you can relate back to the last album. You know, such as Fluorescent Adolescent. You know, it could fit right into the first album. It's witty, it's clever. The lyrics again are perfect.
Favorite Worst Nightmare got some real mixed reactions from the fans. Some fans said it was amazing, the best album they'd ever heard, better than the original. I think I read somewhere somebody had written it blows the first one out of the water. Other people said it was, it's the first one all over again. It was, people worried they would just, Arctic Monkeys can't do anything different, almost like a one-trick pony, which they are recycling again for their next album. I think the fact that it was not a bad album, and in fact it was a good album. I think no one was disappointed with it by any stretch of the imagination. A lot of people loved that album, but I think there wasn't that excitement about it, and I don't think they maybe did quite enough to satisfy all the fans. That maybe some fans wanted something completely different or completely phenomenal, like we'd all been taught to expect from this band. I don't think they quite reached it.
Arctic Monkeys are showing on this album that they're a serious band. They've turned up the volume a bit. They've developed into a strong rock band rather than you know, a kind of okay kind of musical band, but with great lyrics. Now they're kind of balancing up a bit more. Alex Turner's lyrics are still, you know, by and large, absolutely spot on in terms of their wit and satire. But the four of them as a band, they really kick a lot of arse these days, and I think that's something to be admired.
It earned them a lot of respect. It's they've stretched their muscles a little bit. They've got the quieter tracks on there. They've messed with different sounds, and I think in some ways it's. I mean, I still probably favour the first album, but I think it's certainly slight evolution on what they've done, and I think it's a good second album. It really is. It doesn't let them down in any way, and it's strong. It's got different strengths to the first album.
All the boys are slag, the best you've ever had. The best you've ever had is just a memory, and those dreams, not as daft as they seem.
I think the second album had some great standout tracks, and I think tracks like D is for Danger was good. Teddy Picker again. Teddy Picker, that great rolling riff that runs through it. A great introduction to, I think it's the second track on the album. Amazing. I think they just proved that they can still do those chunky guitars and those cheeky lyrics.
For me, I mean, the singles I think are great, and Fluorescent Adolescent was, immediately for me was probably my favourite track on there. But I like the mellower moments on there. I think 505, for instance, and is a great closer, and it's suddenly you've got on there, and in the midst of all the kind of the big stuff, you've got Alex kind of crooning, and them turning the volume down and showing that they can. And okay, they did that on the EP, but it's showing that they have got this kind of a bit more diversity to their sound, and they're good musicians. I mean, I think what we've sometimes gets forgotten is they are good players. They're good at what they do.
Fluorescent Adolescent is a bit of a favourite of mine. And D is for Dangerous. And there's lyrically it's quite interesting because there's a lot of kind of sexual references and what have you, which is always interesting. But again, the way that the band sounds as a unit comes through strongly on those tracks, and it really pricks up your ears, I think.
When you put on paper what the first album was about, the subject matter, some people would say, well, it's so blindingly obvious that it's almost cliched, but